Better breweries.
So we're going to jump into disaster response. We've talked a lot. We have talked since 8:30 about planning and about readiness, and at the end of the day, we intend to continue to talk about the plan, but we want to talk about what disaster response looks like. Overarching, a little bit more generalization, we're going to specify it a little bit to earthquakes and wildfires, but knowing what happens after a disaster logistically and what you should be paying attention to is very important to set yourself up for success. We talked a lot about how long recovery, 'cause long-term recovery is a phrase, but how long recovery can take. The average economy and geographic area it takes for them to recover from a disaster is on average 20 years. So, and I think it's really important that we start before we talk about disaster response, and we're going to say recovery starts from the first day of response, and we're going to have all these conversations about what response looks like in getting into recovery. But I want to set expectations on the longevity. This is a marathon, not a race. The second we hit an incident, we go into response. But just keep in mind, it is a marathon, not a race. And you're going to have to pace yourself, and you're going to get tired, and you are going to need to identify resources. And there are going to be days where you might throw a trash can or you yell at someone because you're tired and you've worked really long days and you're just trying to do the right thing. I think that's very important through this. I don't know if Ed has moments where he's like, I could have handled that different. But I know I've been there, and I'll be very honest about it. Just because as we go in from an incident, there's the moment it happens, and then it's what are we going to do about it? And through that, this is why it's so important to have the trainings and the exercises and the planning. You might not have the right answer, but you know what you definitely don't want to do. And that's half the battle to start out with, is let's start picking away from the list of what you definitely don't want to do so you can figure out what you do want to do. A mentor of mine in emergency management said, I've asked him multiple times when he's making decisions throughout this process, and he just goes, Brittany, I made the best decision I could with the information I had at the time, and I can live with that. And it's something I have used in my day-to-day, and also more importantly through disasters when you're not always going to have all the information. You're not always going to have all the processes in place, but you want to do the best you can with the information and the resources you have at the time. So I just think it's really important that you take that home with you, and you think about that when you're operating some of these plans, and if you ever do have to operationalize your plan, you're just doing the best you can. Don't take it personal. If you did not plan for everything, if you didn't know it was going to be the most catastrophic wildfire that you've ever seen, that's okay. At least you know that if you're going in with these tools and you take this training seriously, you're doing the best you can with the information that you've set yourself up for. And it might just be a long list of what you're not going to do. And that's okay too. Okay, so going into disaster response, we're going to start with Ed again. And we're going to have a conversation of what did the days right after the event look like for you?
Okay, I'll start just slightly before the event, because every year in California that time of year, we're all deathly afraid that the next fire is going to come rolling through. So it's an annual event, so it would be improper to say we weren't altogether unprepared. My wife, for example, always keeps a box full of the most valuable things in her house, ready to go. Sure enough, that morning, we saw smoke coming over the mountain, headed our way. It was not a good look in the sky. I headed to work. My wife stayed behind. She was evacuated 2 hours later to receive the evacuation call. She left. And then there was really this period of unknowingness once we left. We just didn't know. It took me 3 days watching the fire maps to watch the footprint of the fire subsume all of Paradise. Actually, it was 1 day in Paradise, but by the time it included the whole burn scar, it was about a 3 to 4 day event. I didn't know if I had a house for 3 days. I was just in the unknowing. When I finally was allowed to go back home, 4 days later, it was with the company of law enforcement, the sheriff's office. The entire area had been secured. At the bottom of our road, at the bottom of the hill, there was a Humvee with an Army soldier with a machine gun there. They were ready to shoot looters, and they were looking for looters. My son was arrested as a looter coming back into the disaster scar to come find some of the property he had left. So, you're in this disaster mode. After the fire, imagine an environment that was nothing but black and gray. There was no green. It was black and gray and black and gray. And for weeks, there was smoke pouring from the same direction, from Paradise, directly over the city of Chico. the most toxic smoke you could probably ever imagine. You can imagine 14,000 houses burning at once, and those houses, they burn to a crisp these days, and they're full of plastics, so you can only imagine. So in our work environment down in the office, one of the things we had to do other than take care of our missing employees was address the office environment because it was full of toxic smoke. So we bought HEPA filters immediately for the office. One of the things we had to get used to very quickly was camping in the public space. There were so many people displaced everywhere. Public right-of-ways, bridges, under bridges, all the parks were filled with campers. That was a plus-minus situation. There was a lot of shoplifting that went on, and the shoplifting went on for more than a year. And it was gratuitous shoplifting, where people who had been displaced found that in the horror of it all, they could just walk into a grocery store, fill up their baskets, and just walk out. And the grocery store, the store owners were not willing to take people to task, given the tragedy of the enormity of the tragedy. So it was just a scene. My daughter told me she was sitting in a park one day, and she had some people sitting behind her and literally bragging about how much they were able to walk out of stores with. And this went on for, and you have to remember, we have a very, very low income disadvantaged population that was displaced. So we're talking about people, and as you well know, when you're homeless, you operate on a survival basis. So imagine all of a sudden 35,000 people in your jurisdiction acting on a survival basis. Now, good news, Northern California. Unexpected surprise in terms of temporary shelter. Everybody in Northern California likes to camp, so everyone's got a tent. A lot of people have trailers, a lot of people have RVs. So there was the most amazing exodus of trailers and RVs out of Paradise you could ever imagine. I mean, presuming they got out. Every campground in the North State was filled with displaced campers, trailers, tenters, etc. And so when we talk about this local sheltering plans, transitional housing, in the immediate aftermath of a disaster, not only are people camping illegally on private lots, backyards, public right-of-ways, you think about where they go. Campgrounds, motels, RV parks, emergency shelters, on-site camping, wet or dry, car parks, and other. Now, the other was sort of interesting because this is a place I wish I'd gone to, in hindsight, I wish I would have lined up. I probably wouldn't have been able to accomplish it. But if you think about all the facilities that we build in our communities that would be uniquely suited to serve a significantly displaced population, state fairgrounds are awesome. They have showers, they have kitchens, they have camping areas, they have places for RV plug-ins, they've got service rooms, they got everything. The State Fair Board of the state of California wasn't interested in talking to us.
Wow.
They provided a little bit of shelter, temporary space for some RVs for about 6 months, and that was all they would allow. But you know, if you think about it, in a perfect world, that facility, uniquely designed, maybe an Army military base, anything like that, you're looking at, you said 20 years, a long time, and you're looking at how do you stabilize a triaged population for a long time. I was in the Loma Prieta earthquake in 1989. It took 30 years before I could go back to Santa Cruz and not recognize that a disaster had happened there. And I fully believe in Paradise, it'll be a 30 to 40 year affair before you will not recognize that something like that had happened there. So these timelines are extraordinary because we're rebuilding infrastructure. So these were very dark days in the immediate days following the disaster. A lot of unknown, a lot of law enforcement and emergency disaster personnel flying all over from all levels of the government. In fact, I've never seen so many emergency responders. It was amazing. So you're running into emergency responders everywhere you go with constant sets of meetings. So that was really, I'm trying to paint a picture for you what it's like in the aftermath of one of these things. Lots of meetings going on, a lot of checking in. And again, in our staff, a lot of internal looking to make sure we made sure we maintained our continuity of services. HUD's first priority. HUD came in very quickly, in addition to FEMA. FEMA gave a lot of stuff away. FEMA had the gall to ask us to come and man their navigation desk for them. We wanted them to come help us out. HUD was terrific, though. HUD came in, and they were really concerned very specifically about the voucher clients that have been displaced. So they actually provided personnel to us to help us find places for our 318 voucher holders that have been displaced. Their HUD clients came first. They checked in on public housing. We didn't have any public housing destroyed. And then we worked with USDA to get some waivers for HUD clients to move into our USDA housing. But HUD was very present. They didn't provide many resources, but they were interested and were helpful.
Awesome, thank you. Any questions for Ed before I go into my questions? Yes?
As you start the rebuilding process, did the state, county, city make any special efforts to bring in somehow outside staff to process permits? Is there normal? Because right now, in our part of Washington, you got a lot, you had plans ready to go. You're several months, maybe a couple of years out.
I'd say our local jurisdictions were all very sympathetic, very helpful. They didn't really accelerate the process, but they understood the urgency of our processes. For us to line up a housing project, it's a minimum of 3 years, usually it's 3 to 7 years. We'll get into that a little later. We have an enormous volume of activity as a result of this, which is exciting, but it came at a price, so we'll talk about that later.
Awesome. Any other questions? Okay. So one of the things that at this point, again, an incident has happened. Everyone's taking care of your own and yourselves, and doing, whether it's a mental inventory, if you have the opportunity to do a physical inventory, if it's an earthquake, you might be just trying to get everyone out, identify if the building is safe. If it's a wildfire, you might be out for a couple of days before you can identify. When you get to that life safety part is over, people physically are safe. You go into what your assessment is, and so I want to go through the damage assessment process with everyone. I have a lot of opinions about this. I'm going to try not to share them all because I understand the importance of damage assessments. So we talked earlier about damage assessment, or having that inventory when it came to being prepared for insurance. It's bigger than that. When it comes to damage assessments and identifying the impact of a disaster, you are part of advocating for not only your PHA and your occupants and your residents, you're part of being part of that community to advocate for you need additional resources. And if I cannot communicate enough the importance of having a relationship with your county and local EM, I'm going to try not to steal the show and let Joel talk because it's his state. But when it comes to damage assessments, communicating all of your damages to your county EM is critical because they're aggregating that data to get it to the state to potentially ask for a presidential declaration, which turns on a lot of resources for the state, for the local community, and for you. So I'll turn it over to Joel before I just keep talking.
No, and kind of second pretty much everything you said. So just for this group for education, so we're going to talk about damage. So there's two distinct disaster types. Everybody understand the difference between IA and PA when it comes to disaster? I see some notes. Okay. So IA, or individual assistance, this is specifically, it's a presidential major disaster declaration for individual assistance, and that is to help individuals impacted by the storm or the event or what caused it. So that provides specific cash that goes directly to the survivor to replace damage to their home, loss of their property, loss of hearing aids. There's a lot of different programs, but it's limited. On the households program is $42,500 is the max grant individual can get, but under other needs assistance, they can get up to another $42,500 under that chain. And then there's a sprinkling of other things, like we talked about earlier about the wells and the septic weren't covered. Those are some additional items that they can FEMA can get cash into. So those are the kind of like services under individual system. And again, these are checks or support to the individuals themselves. So in your population, if there was a large disaster and we got an IA declaration, those individuals that lost property in that residence that you managed, that would be covered. Or if they owned their home, those repairs would be covered. So public assistance is not for necessarily the individual in the public, but it's for the community. So that's really your community recovery assistance. So that's where you as agencies, your property, your physical property or damages would be covered under that program. So that's kind of the basic. One is like public, so you're thinking of public assistance, think of public infrastructure or public entities. Yep. Individual assistance is the actual individual citizen or resident.
Let me say something that often is confused. the political thing that you will always hear is that the president has provided assistance through FEMA for this area. And everybody thinks like, oh, great. Anybody who's been impacted is going to be able to go to FEMA and get assistance. Not so. Because most of the time when the president makes a declaration in advance, it's for public assistance. And it's for public assistance for the emergency responders and you all in your emergency response functions, being able to get reimbursed for that. It is not until those damage assessments are done and there's a justification for a declaration of other types of public assistance that then you're able to get money to help with other types of things, your roads and bridges in the community, potentially for unmet needs on even your public housing. So those, the political announcement that's always going to come, it's going to sound like the federal government is here to help you and you're going to get everything you need. Even the millions of dollars that may be, they say, oh, he's asked for millions of dollars for this disaster. Well, the truth of the matter is that goes into a fund that funds everything that FEMA does, and it may be fixing some holes that they had from Hurricane Harvey that they're still trying to deal with, and they'll get to you when they get to you on a reimbursement basis with whatever money is approved. So that is political stuff. Just to let you know. On the individual assistance side, this is really important that you communicate this to your residents. Joe was telling you that there are different things for which FEMA may approve individual assistance, and they're pretty clear about these are the categories of things for which you can use the money. People who are impacted by a disaster like the one that Ed's residents had to go through are just trying to make it, right? And so if they've got a bunch of money that hit their account and they've got needs, they usually and likely are going to use it, and you can't blame anyone for using the money for whatever it is they have a need for. Well, doing that with the FEMA money and not being able to account for, I used the money in the way that I was supposed to in this program, may impact their ability, usually does, impact their ability to get additional funds should there be additional individual assistance funds given. Right, they won't give up to the max initially. Usually give you, pretty decent size of an allocation. But if someone, and this is for you all too, as disaster impacted people, if you are eligible and have an ongoing need, and FEMA checks in with you, you've got to be able to document how it is that money was used. So if you can't, then they won't give you the additional allocation.
So let's circle back though and just focus before we even get to that point. It's how do we get there? How do we get to a presidential declaration? And the fact that it's all over the news and everyone's saying it's bad and everyone's saying it's very bad and everyone's saying that they're losing homes, there's still the piece of how bad is bad. And that's the damage assessment part. There are many times that a lot of entities, to include PHAs, do not know what's going on behind the scenes. And it's the county aggregating how bad is bad, doing those damage assessments, and aggregating that data to give to the state so that they can package it up with their support to request a presidentially declared disaster to turn on these services, whether it's IA, whether it's PA, direct federal assistance, et cetera. You communicating your damages to your county adds to that number. And the reason that's very important is because there's thresholds to be able to turn on these services. There is a dollar threshold for damages and impact, and then there is a or resident household specific threshold that has to be assessed. And so if you do not have a relationship with your county and you're not communicating that, you will be left out of that data, and that can make the difference of not only the state potentially being declared, but that specific county that you're in. Because there is a county threshold and there is a state threshold. So just to give a little bit more, when you see the maps and you saw that there's a presidentially declared disaster, and then you see a map and you see the counties that light up and you say, well, why did they get picked and not me? This is how that happens.
Yeah, and so that's what I was going to get to. So, I mean, yeah, there's two different thresholds. Again, we have a state, and within Washington State, our PA damage threshold's $14.2 million. It's kind of our target. I mean, we call it a threshold, but it's really just the indicator that we qualify for public assistance. But
It's basically saying a disaster bigger than that, we can't handle it as a state. We need federal assistance in order to get us there. And
Yeah.
every state has their own individual threshold.
and it's based off population. And then the county in each of the jurisdictions, counties have their own, and even tribal communities have. But the tribal communities have a specific set aside. It's not based on population size, so you have to hit that in damages. Sometimes it's easy for certain counties.
Right.
One of our counties is like $27,000, and then they qualify. That county qualifies for public assistance. Others, such as King County, is $10.2 million. And so I'm surprised we got you in this last disaster. But the big thing
Welcome.
about that, if you have damages or you have people impacted from a disaster, just write some notes. We had to evacuate 30 people. We had damage to 3 homes. When you go back in, it's just kind of like tracking. I have damage to these properties, and I took some photos. If you just take your phone out, click some photos, and then you can circle back. Because the damage assessment process for us, it's about the event happened. Before somebody comes to look at your property from FEMA or the state, it's probably going to be about a month after the disaster, just because based on the size. If it's a little lower scale, more localized disaster, I don't have multiple counties, it might be a little quicker. But it's a couple weeks, maybe a week or two for the county to get out there. A week after that, I get out there. A week after that, FEMA gets out there with us all to do it all over again, and we have to validate those damages. And they have to be eligible. You have to be an eligible entity. It has to be eligible damage to the disaster. So it's a lot to unpack. So the biggest thing for you is if you have damages from an event that likely, or you think it might ever be a disaster, take some photos, take some quick notes. And that, like little quick notes, and that'll get you started. Because when the county comes back out, or we go back and, hey, do you have any damages? Please let us know. And that's what we're going to do initially. If you have anything that was damaged during these usually date time frame, let us know, let your EMs know, so that we can start rolling those all together to get those declarations. I was talking to people in the break, and they said they had damages from the January freezing event. I'm like, oh, make sure you apply as an applicant for PA. And she's like, well, I'm in this county. I'm like, you guys didn't get declared.
Just
And
kidding.
she did, and in my sense, like, did we do enough outreach early on to make sure that her information was getting passed to the county EM to push it forward? And so, and that's a gap on for my team, is making sure that we're getting we have to work as a home rule state through the counties and to the cities and local jurisdictions for a lot of the stuff, but we're going to make sure we're getting the information out so that we can kind of push this along. Because if you don't list if your county doesn't get declared, even though you have damages, you can't get after that funding stream is gone. You can't get after that federal funding stream. If your county gets declared and you did identify the damage early on and you add it later, we can do that, but we got to know why you didn't report it the first, or just a no. Didn't need it, or it wasn't required, but we can add you at that point. But early on, get those damages and get them to your local EMs, or generally your county EMs, or who we're working with. Sometimes they'll work through the cities as well, so they know what kind of damage you have. And you might have a lot of damages, but we still might not meet the threshold. And as a state, we've had some events that we were trying to get in, and we couldn't get it. We couldn't get there as a state, though we had jurisdictions that had a lot of damage, just we couldn't meet the state threshold. We got declared a PA in Spokane. We never met the threshold, but we got something else. We got the IA side of that disaster for that population, and then we were able to add on some categories through some additional work. So there's ways of it. So document that is the biggest thing. Worst case scenario, if you can't remember, just take some photos, keep them on your phone. We'll come back to you.
And I think a best practice there is right after an incident is, and you can have this part of your plan, is identify who's going to be that POC daily. So if you're having, daily cadence meetings every morning through this process or whatever else that looks like, is have someone afterwards that's communicating every day to your county EM. Just send a status email update that states, this is where we're at. These are our resource needs. You need water, you need sheltering, you need food. Whatever those needs are, communicate them to your county, because if you cannot get them, they might be able to through the state resources or county resources. And then also state, here's what we've identified as damage. And just keep that going. It's a nice record. It's a nice reminder to them if they're not reaching out to you. And then knowing that they have that, the second that the state reaches out and says, hey, King County, what's going on, they're going to be like, oh yeah, I also have this email, let me send this over to you.
Yeah. And then with that as well, we talk a lot about insurance, and insurance is valuable. So I can't, like, so you got a $500,000 worth of damages to your properties, your insurance, your deductible is going to be 10% of that, so $50,000. That $50,000 counts. So I can count that $50,000. I can't count the $500,000 for the total damages, but whatever your deductible is an eligible expense and it can get us over the threshold and is reimbursable once we actually get a declaration.
But as we were talking about earlier, if you have a total loss, that's 500,000, right? But your policy only covers you up to 300,000 on it. It could be that 200,000
Yep.
is eligible as well for public assistance.
Any
right?
gap from the
Any
repair.
gap, any unmet need. Going back to
Also, fighting your insurance is eligible if it's ineligible.
What'd you say?
Fighting your insurance, sorry, Kenton, but sometimes that happens.
And basic
What?
declaration, you can get, there's a whole other program on getting a lawyer provided by FEMA to help you fight your insurance company, but that's a whole different story.
Go get them. Go get those specialty lines carriers.
so
Just kidding.
the individuals. So we've said talk to your emergency managers, make sure the information gets to them. Some of you who have been through this probably have had HUD contacting you as well, asking for some of the same information. Here's why. Sausage is how sausage is made, guys. Those numbers that HUD is asking for feed all the way up to headquarters. Felicia and her folks get it, they take it, they give it to the Secretary's office, and there's someone there who's communicating at a national level to folks at FEMA, sitting around a table, sometimes literally at FEMA, and saying, no, this is what we're hearing from the folks who we have a relationship with, right, about what the damage is, so that things aren't missed, and that, like, you know, if something's not syncing up, figure out why, so they can go back and make sure that you all and other HUD-affiliated, you know, multifamily housing and otherwise, who aren't being counted in a number, get counted in a number. That happens. The other thing that happens is those numbers and those that we're getting go into, there's somebody from HUD who usually is involved in a meeting at the Office of Management and Budget where there is a discussion about if this thing is big enough for a declaration, right? And so, you know, having been that person before, you know, I will have data that says, listen, we know you all have this, but this is the size that we're seeing from our vantage point. And the reason why is because we want to get as much of the money up front to you all from FEMA that's available, and make sure people are registered, because all that impacts, as I said once before, potentially how much money you might get in supplemental disaster appropriations from Congress, including disaster CDBG. So, you know, report it, track it, report it to everybody who's asking for it. Make sure, and this is one thing in your plan, who's going to be the person who does that? You know, there are people in the rooms where that Brittany and Joe run for FEMA, that all they do is report. All they do. Yep. They produce really nice reports every day so that the governor can go out and talk about what's going on and what you all are doing, what the impacts are in the local community and what's going on. You identify somebody who has that job when the disaster hits.
So Kenton.
Felicia has something.
I'm sorry.
Just on that, so you heard Ed say several times that we called, we sent people, we didn't send money. But, here's where it's an honest statement. Here's where I want to put stuff in the importance of reporting about it. I know you feel like they're calling us again, they want these numbers, but there is that reason behind it, is because we will have media report outs that's saying, you know, you've got 5,000 people that are without something, and then we get your numbers, and we're able to counter that and say, actually, no, we've heard from our local counterparts in the state, or there's only 500 of them, right? And so
And
Yeah,
they can
and if
also
you
add
all
to that
have-
same daily email that you're sending to your local EM. This is what's going on. These are my needs. These are the damages. These are how people are impacted. And then
And-
you already have the email teed up. You can just forward as needed.
That's right. They're probably requiring updates by a certain time every day, right? So you can say this information is as current as we have up until this point. We will update it later today at 4 p.m. or tonight at 7 p.m., whatever the time frame is. And so if you have that and everybody has an expectation, you don't update your numbers until 7 p.m. at night, right? Because you've got those, 14,000 other things that you have to do, then that creates a discipline around expectations for you all.
Yes.
So in the disaster space, when we know it's coming, so usually tornadoes and we normally don't, right? But when we know a hurricane is coming, we initially, so in my headquarters office, I have someone that's responsible for all the disaster contact with the field offices. So they immediately are getting information from, the person who's now, Fred in our office, Janet Coleridge. She's already reaching out to my staff and she's saying, hey, you ready? We're gonna establish our protocol for reporting, put people on guard. And so then you do not have to wait to hear from the field office, but the field office is who we consider to be your first point of contact. So whoever you always contact, after you're gonna make contact with them, they're gonna let the folks know what you're already hearing on ground. So the more you're proactive about that, the better. Call us before we call you. But I would tell you, we track, especially in hurricane situations where we get more advanced notice. But on any event, whether it's a presidential declaration or just a state kind of emergency, we are definitely tracking anytime there are households that are displaced. We are tracking until they are all out. So we still have open dockets from some of those previous disasters, even if we just have one household that's still displaced. You probably know that, don't you, Ed? Because if you have any displacements, you're still required to give us at least some level of update. I'm tracking it in my role, and this is information that I report up to our acting secretary, to having a deputy secretary. They're also getting that information.
So for those on Zoom, the big thing that we're talking about is the importance of reporting, coordinating with your HUD field office, making sure that they have up-to-date information. It's critical when it comes to HUD HQ having that information as they're navigating and supporting resources, and they're able to answer whether it's OMB, whether it's the White House, the current unmet needs, and through all unmet needs down to that last displaced person.
Sounds good. And then maybe this is my shameless plug for the city of Washington. So we're talking about a lot about FEMA IA and FEMA PA. The state is pushing, or my office is trying to get funding for a state level IA and state level PA program. So right now I have an IA team within my agency that supports our federal declarations, but as a state of Washington, we've only ever had 3. So our disaster profile is not like a hurricane that takes out so many numbers of homes. We get moderate sized disasters for what it kind of home impacts. So that's the thing we're going to do. So if you do know an elected official in your area and you want to push for it, but yes, so we're trying to get state funding to run a state level program. This would kind of fill that intermediate gap. That would be support to your residents as they're displaced and kind of some additional assistance as necessary. And then we're looking at the same thing on a state PA, really to get after debris management, emergency protective measures, and critical infrastructure. Not maybe the full gambit as a state. I don't think the state can fund
And I
all the
believe the
different-
state of California does something similar.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what Alaska does at this time. but-
Alaska does have a state IA and state PA as well. They have a different kind of budget though up there. So, but yeah, so those are just the things. So, but in the future, kind of as a group, as those roll out, if we luck out with legislature this next year, we move some of those programs forward. Definitely something as we'll do some information briefs on those specific programs because our programs mirror the federal programs, but they're slightly different. Scope of disasters a little bit smaller, not as much in some of the benefit streams, you know what I mean? But there's going to be something there for your residents if they're dislocated, and possibly for your jurisdictions if they have damages. So.
Thank you. Any questions? Ed?
Just a follow-up comment. So we're talking mostly about the loss of physical structures, which really didn't literally impact our agency so much. We only lost 12 units. It was our voucher holders and our voucher program that took the hit. And because 15% of our voucher holders lost their housing, we lost 15% of our admin fee revenues overnight. Our jeopardy was an immediate financial jeopardy. And so our first efforts in disaster response was to look at Section 8 program and how do we salvage this program, especially when we have a community we're in where there's no housing opportunity. Where do we lease our people up? So we were really in trouble. Not to mention we were short on staff. On the staffing side, it took us 3 years to reconstitute staff. We had a turnover. Usually we have virtually no turnover rate. Chico, California is a place people like to come and stay. But we had 30% turnover rate for 4 years. It took us 4 years to settle staff down. It took us 5 years to get the Section 8 program back to where we were not reporting weekly to HUD on our numbers because it was just so tenuous, clawing back housing opportunity. The thing that saved us, and I'll just give you a hint of what comes, but we took our Section 8 program. We've always believed very strongly in the tenant-based nature of the program, that tenants are given an opportunity to go select their own housing. But when you have no choice and you have no housing, and we give out vouchers, and less than 6% of those we give vouchers out to can find housing, it becomes disingenuous. So you start looking at different ways to play the program. And it really pushed us into project basing and vouchers. That's what we'll get into as an enormous part of our disaster recovery strategy.
Thank you. So Kenton, is there anything you'd like to add right now in the days and weeks following a disaster?
A couple things, sure. As I noted earlier, the more information you have already gathered before disaster strikes, and the more you have an understanding of what your policy covers and doesn't cover, the better condition you're going to be in, the fewer friction and pain points you're going to have in the insurance claims process. Hopefully you won't have to fight your insurance company. But there probably are some really important differences between how the specialty lines market responds to disasters compared to how, like, the admitted market responds to disasters. And Ed or Fred, you might know more about this than I do, actually. After a disaster of scale, admitted market insurers send teams of people in RVs, and they set up in Lowe's parking lots, and they write checks to whoever shows up that has a policy and can prove they have a policy. They write a check. Your contents coverage, they write a check. The debris removal process, they write a check. So they're giving out some initial money right away without any proof of loss except the fact that you have a policy and you can show them a picture of your destroyed home. They want to get you on the way to recovery and in a safe place of shelter as soon as possible. I don't know specialty lines people send an armada of RVs out to Lowe's parking lots to engage in that. My guess is they don't. So what does that mean? That means your process is more difficult than the average homeowner who suffers the same loss, right? And so it's important to have an understanding now, while there's nothing burning or while there's not an earthquake and what have you, to understand what the claims process looks like for the insurer that you're using. And again, that's a conversation with your broker or directly with your company to find out more about how that claims process works and how what is their process, what do they require? Maybe they have an online claim form. A lot of insurers in the admitted market today have apps on your phone. So you can file a claim, you take a few pictures of your smashed fender or your burned house or your burned kitchen, and you send it to the insurer, and that starts the claims process within minutes of the loss having occurred. Whether or not the insurer you're working with has that or not is a good thing for you to try and find out. But also, you just want as few hurdles as as few roadblocks, hurdles, and barriers as you can have. So a detailed inventory, as detailed as you can have it, is helpful not only for the FEMA process, but also for the insurance process. And one last, I think, important tip is we talked a little bit about the money available that offsets the gaps, right? But the reverse can also happen. If you have coverage for, say, debris removal as part of your policy, and they write that check to you right away, let's just say they do that, and you get a check for your contents coverage to help start replacing things that were lost. You get money for if you have this coverage, and you're helping to pay tenants find locations to stay, and there are vouchers for that, and that's part of your insurance coverage, and you get a check for that, and some of that debris removal money, and some of that, all this upfront money, and you spend it for other purposes. because you're just getting a check. You can do whatever you want with the money, right? You don't have to pay the contractor, you don't have to pay the hotel, whatever you're going to do with the money. But if then some of that has been reimbursed by FEMA money, they're going to come back for that money. And that, in some cases, we've seen this happen in Oregon after the wildfires there, where the insurance company is coming back for the final settlement, 2 years later, and saying, well, you're not going to get as much now because FEMA clawed back some of the money that it spent on debris removal, and we paid you for the debris removal, but you didn't have to pay that to a private contractor because FEMA took care of it. So it is important to have silos for the money and make sure that you're tracking, where your insurance proceeds went and that they went to the things they were intended for, even though may not be any requirement from the insurer. But you don't want to be in a place where when the final settlement comes, some amount has been reduced because of FEMA dollars that were provided for the same purpose that the insurance money was provided for.
And the reason that's the case is the most sacrosanct thing in federal disaster funding is, and this is from the Stafford Act, which governs federal disaster funding, is prohibition against duplication of benefits. And so first in the line of duplication of benefits is what your insurance company provides. FEMA comes in behind that. And so if FEMA duplicates a benefit from the insurance company, there's going to be some settling up that's going to happen at some point. And that's what he's talking about.
And that's a specific thing. I keep going back to Spokane disaster. We had the fires last August. We didn't get it declared till February. So trying to get benefits and getting resources out during that disaster was delayed specifically because the state has spent a lot of money out there. Voluntary organizations have spent money out there. There have been a lot of insurance. Sometimes earlier in the disaster, the insurance process might not have rolled out completely yet. So FEMA programs come. Voluntary organizations might not be established to provide assistance. As the longer time you have from the event to kind of when resources start flowing in, that's when they get more of a concern of what other money has been applied, because FEMA does count voluntary funds. So if somebody got $500 for hearing aids from a nonprofit, but then they're going to claim with FEMA, hey, I need new hearing aids for $500, and there's documentation of that, FEMA could take their money back or deny them $500 from other assistance they have. So duplication benefits is a serious thing, and it's something we have to check. So that's why sometimes when we do PDAs, we're like, do you have any other, we'll ask, hey, do you have insurance? Are there any other funding streams coming into this agency for a similar purpose? Especially since you're tied to another federal agency, there's that balancing act of, okay, what is in the legal authority and responsibility of HUD, and what is the legal authority and responsibility of your agency, your direct agency. And again, those gaps. So if HUD covers it, FEMA can't touch it. We have to sometimes we have to tweeze out the ones eaches. Okay, they would cover five power poles in your complex, but you had 8, so we're going to cover the other 3. You know what I mean? So that's sometimes with. So when we do demonstration, we might tweeze out a little bit of that information with you guys, a little bit more detail to get the right number for your eligible disaster expenses.
That makes sense.
Now,
Okay.
one last note here
Yeah.
on insurance in the single-family home market, and again, 14,000 houses destroyed. We learned some things about insurance because really insurance is our first line of defense in the event of a disaster. We look to the insurance industry to come walking in the door. Well, what actually happened? We figure about 25% of those displaced, 25% of the households had the insurance and the resources to simply pick up and move on. They were able to afford a home and move on. We figure about half of the rest, within 3 years, were able to cobble their way forward. A lot of them are still waiting for settlements from the PG&E lawsuit because there was fault to the fire. And then about a third, half that rest, about a third to 30 to 40%, have no resource, no recourse, no insurance whatsoever. Or if they did receive a payout, it's long been spent. They're on the streets homeless now. So, it's really the insurance piece addresses that part of the population what you would expect. But we forget about that part of the population in our communities that really doesn't buy insurance very well.
Right. Makes sense. Any questions on insurance or comments? All right, let's move on to sheltering and transportation. We've talked about this a lot, but the big thing here that I just want to make sure that we're really touching on are what options are available, and does your plan cover both short-term and long-term needs? So I know that I have focused and talked with the panel a lot about the short-term needs, when it comes to that congregate sheltering. But Ed keeps also highlighting what's happened in Butte County as far as that long-term sheltering. And so sometimes I consider short-term really those first few weeks, maybe 2 months. What Ed, you're experiencing is really months to years.
Years.
So can you just give me a little bit more of what that's looked like for you as far as coordinating?
Sure.
What's your experience been?
So we have a lot of unsheltered in our community, and it really folds into the work of the continuum of care. Pre-disaster, we had a background homeless population in our county of about 900 homeless persons. After the disaster, we had about 6,000 additional, and the two populations really functionally over the course of 2 years conflated. And to where what we're really working with are the most disadvantaged, most undercapacitated individuals in the community. It didn't matter whether they came from the disaster or not. These are the people who really just don't have the chops to go cut it on their own. And these are the ones morally, as a society, we're most obligated to help.
Right.
So it's really aggravating when you see your homeless population explode. And at the same time, it really calls upon the continuum of care to have us act together. So we really worked very hard to optimize the continuum resources. And we kept coming back to the continuum of care as our, I don't know whether I call it a support group, but it was certainly a coordinating group that really cut through, and it was built upon the previous relationships, and that's why it was successful moving forward. And it was a good vehicle for addressing a lot of what we confronted in post-disaster environment. But yeah, the specter of different, one of the things I wanted to talk about is the culture of your local community. In Butte County, we have Butte County as a jurisdiction, and we have 5 incorporated jurisdictions inside of it. So we're a family of 6, and every one of those family members is as different as you or I. And they all took different perspectives relative to this displaced population. Chico, the Ecotopia, Chico State, cool, hip town, took umbrage to these people. What are they doing here? Oroville saw this as a growth opportunity. Let's grow Oroville. Gridley, a little farm town. Let's grow Gridley. Biggs wants to grow. So there's these little communities want to grow. There's these bigger communities who are defending the Ecotopia principles. We all love cool societies and a beautiful environment. And my gosh, we're not going to let those people ruin our community, are we? We deal with these cultural attitudes that is a lot of the politics we play. And particularly in rural communities, the stakeholder interests kind of lend themselves to the way it was. They don't want to see change. In a place like Northern California Valley, if a town like Willow starts to grow, they're afraid that they're going to bring people from Sacramento up the valley.
Right.
Those people. And this is sort of a rural dynamic. In rural areas of America, we have this shortage of housing, but as soon as we build it, these Californians come and ruin the whole thing. So, there's this dynamic in the West of growth and fighting growth that plays directly into the undersupply of housing that feeds everything we're talking about today.
Butte County is a red island in a sea of blue. And so, it as different from everything you think stereotypical California can be. And so that was part, and you had people from Sacramento coming up trying to tell these folks, how their recovery was going to go. So it was culture clash. It was really interesting environment. I imagine that hasn't worked itself out too well in the early years.
So going back to something we talked about earlier, which is the education piece, housing authorities. By God, if it's one thing I haven't learned over 40 years, we have to educate everywhere we go, whether it's our politicians, our networkers, our social workers, our family members. We are our clients. We have to walk our clients through 40 pages of orientation materials, and they don't even have a 3rd grade education. We have clients who can barely sign their name. So this is our whole game is education. How do we communicate, and how do we establish those lines, build those bridges, and then how do we maintain them? Because when the disaster comes, you're going to need every one of them.
Thank you. So moving into federal and non-federal disaster response. We're just going to talk a little bit, it's mainly going to be Joel, as far as what is available for public and private resources.
I'm trying to get.
So
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I can take first lead at this. So we're talking a lot about VOADs that might be available. I don't know what that looks like in Washington, but I'm interested in how also Washington stands up their RSFs or their recovery support functions.
Okay, so recovery support functions, so specifically for this one would be our housing RSF. So that is activated at my office. I mean, because we run as the State Emergency Operations Center out of Camp Murray, down in Lakewood area. So we, as we need it, stand up our housing RSF, and our goal is to stand it up as soon as we think there might be a need, we stand it up. So it's during our Spokane event shortly after. As soon as we heard we had more than a dozen homes destroyed, like, hey, there's at least a dozen homes, okay, we're going to activate our housing RSF. And for us, that brings different players to the table. So it brings our partners on Department of Commerce who work with your agency and HUD, our DSHS, Department of Health, so all those different kind of supporting state agencies and other voluntary partners from State VOAD. American Red Cross has a seat at the table as the primary across the nation, the primary kind of disaster assistance agency. Salvation Army has a seat at the table as well as some other VOADs in the region, and we can bring in other partners to that team. And that's some of the work, as I mentioned, we've been doing. We did this initiative with other states and FEMA to look at improving our housing RSF and kind of how we roll that out. How do we work in blue sky days to be ready for those non-blue sky days, those dark and stormy nights, as my team likes to say. How do we get ready for that? So that's what we're looking at a lot now. That's how kind of the housing RSF specifically. But there's energy RSFs, there's transportation, and they're based on the need and the complexity as which RSFs are stood up. The ones that tell you they're stood up the most is housing RSF. So since I have been in EMD.
Who leads the housing RSF?
So the housing RSF lead is works for me as our human services program supervisor and IA individual assistance branch director within EMD. Taylor Dietz is her name, but at my office is actually the lead for the housing RSF.
Oh, okay.
And you'll find in some states they'll have a sister agency that deals with
Community
housing.
affairs, housing, community
Right,
development.
that may lead the housing RSF. So in Idaho, Oregon, and Alaska, you might want to go back and identify who leads your state housing RSF. And that's certainly a name that you want to put in your plan and someone that you want to develop a relationship with in advance of needing to talk to those folks.
So our counterpart, as I mentioned, Commerce is the Housing Policy Office at the Department of Commerce, and they have reps as part of our team. So, and then some of that counterparts of that team will be here tomorrow. Nicole's not our primary, but she's part of that group that does be together for that stuff. So
Okay.
here tomorrow.
And then leading out this area, let's talk about federal resources. So, Fred, can you just touch on HUD technical assistance?
Sure. So FEMA has the funds that are available immediately to help out with the impacts of the disaster. HUD tries because it has, your relationships with you all to provide as much assistance as it possibly can. So there are people in the field offices. Something happens. We talked about it earlier. They're going to be contacting you and asking for numbers, but those numbers also are going to feed discussion that is happening at the federal level about whether the housing recovery support function gets executed at a federal level. It usually does. Like Joe was saying, that's usually one of the first ones to get executed in a disaster, which then HUD comes in as the lead from a recovery standpoint from the federal government. Okay? And that means that there are people from HUD who will be assigned to the State Office of Emergency Management to work with FEMA, work with you all and all of your local partners to provide the assistance that you all need to for as long as that recovery support function is stood up. And so some of those decisions are made immediately after the disaster. Some of them it takes a little while. That's why reporting the numbers impacts how much of resource will be available for you. It is FEMA that's paying for the HUD folks to come and help you all, let's be clear, right? So we, just like I said, you may have to document how you spend your hours following a disaster. If, forgive me, I have a little bit of, I'm a little bit, what's the word? When I talk about HUD, I sometimes use we, and I'm no longer there because I spent so much time there. Forgive me, Felicia, if I'm. All right, good. So, I'll do it as I can. So we will send folks to the state, the impacted state that has stood up the housing RSF to be there on the ground to provide assistance, right? And so it's helping to think through what the impacts of the disaster are. How I got to California to work with Ed was through a contract that the state pre-positioned to bring in experts to support the various recovery support functions in the state of California. They said, find us somebody who can help work with our housing RSF function. I was that guy in the early months following the Camp Fire. And so that was because the state of California had a pre-positioned contract to do that, right? Not all states have the resources thought through that, but that may be, you may get someone who's been through a number of disasters there to support you through your state's RSF and through the federal RSF coming directly from HUD.
So, and just does everybody know what an RSF, what their role is? No, okay. So the whole point, it is at least how we all operate in the state, and I'm pretty sure it's fair, it is a multi-agency working group to fill your gaps or help assist you in your needs. So that's the whole point. We bring in all the different players from the state agencies involved and look, okay, and we'll pre-plan. That's why, hey, as soon as a disaster happens, we know people are evacuated, we haven't got back in to see really how many homes are damaged. Hey, but what resources? Do we have enough sheltering capacity right now? Do we need to reach out to other partners in federal or other state agencies or activate those mutual aid agreements at the state level or higher? That's the whole point, is they start early on and kind of like thinking about the problems you might already have and try to plan for them, get resources flowing. But then as we get information back from you all and the communities, hey, what are our real needs, is to action some of those, fill the gaps where they have their agency, research where we can fill those gaps in different aspects. So that's really, it's a working group to help you with your needs around housing.
Awesome, thank you, Joel. So now we're going to go into, again, we're in that disaster response phase of what's going on with IT at this point. Where do we care about when it comes to that IT response, Ron?
So first thing we're going to do is assess what's working and what isn't. We've got to know what systems we have available and communicate that with our management team and our recovery team. Management's going to want to know what of our site offices are working, what aren't. Can we get to the internet? You're going to have your communication plan to residents and landlords. Are we using our website for that? What are we using for that? Which systems are running? So we have our voice data being everything from our internal network. Can we restaff our offices? Can we fully function out of those? Do we have our servers, access to our servers, cloud or not cloud? Have we lost data? If we've lost any of those, if those are not functional, the very next question will be, when can we get them back? And that's important. Also, things like desktops or laptops. If your people have become habitual savers of information on their laptops, that becomes a problem for us to try to aggregate data back. Then it's critical, right? And that may not be backed up either. So you need to be aware of that. So we're doing that assessment. Same with internet. What's our connection back to internet? We do everything in the cloud at this point for one reason or another. Is our website up and running? So that's going to be key to our ability to respond as an organization. And then for IT help, depending on how many of you have an IT staff of one? There you go. Okay. Who's available to help?
How many have zero?
How many have zero? Anybody have a zero IT? Okay. You contract out? Okay. So again, part of that best practice business IT continuity kind of thing is making sure that they're on call, you know how to get a hold of them, they're available, so they can help you do that. And then we had mentioned that before with staff. You know, again, part of this assessment overall is who's available. So we've identified in our planning who are the key function people that we need to be a hold of and be able to get in touch with for processes and services. So I need to know who they are, where they are, and that they're capable. So maybe they're working remotely because they can't get in to the office, or our best case for delivering services is remote. So IT is scrambling to get that assessment of what's working and what's not out in the field. Then the secondary step really is, from my perspective, is I'm working with my leadership team, my program team, to talk through what are those services that are going to be impacted to our residents, to our landlords, to our tenants in the short run. Again, it's that assessment of, Ed talked about the triage. So, you know, we're looking at properties, but then we're also looking at how to restore operations and getting some of the things flowing again. I need to know what those impacts are. And then I mentioned earlier, we talked about that priority list of functions that have to be restored. Like, what are the things that we need to put together really quick? The IT team is working to make sure that those particular services get restored in order, but that's in a combination, it's actually in communication with the rest of the team about here's what's working, here's what we need to restore, here's when we're going to restore it, and here's the sequence of the things that we're going to restore. The communication plan, we had talked about that again a little bit. So IT is going to facilitate that in most cases. Is it going to be by chat, by mobile phone, by text, by email? How are we going to do that? So again, we need to make sure that those services are up and running, that we have connections to everybody that has to have those things. We have things like phone lists and emails and text messaging and things like that in place as well. And then supporting the communication plan with the staff, the broader staff, with our residents and landlords in our community, facilitating that, whether it's going to be on our website or if we have the email addresses for people like residents and landlords and things like that, how do we communicate that? So the IT team is going to be really busy at reestablishing those services, but not in a vacuum. But definitely in collaboration with the leadership team, keeping them informed, probably back to that daily email, probably hourly email if it's IT. This is what we have, this is what we have back in line, and this is when we expect to get this back.
Thank you. Any questions on IT or things to be thinking about? Or any hypotheticals of how you'd like thoughts on? Okay, so let's move on to external communication and information sharing. So could have talked about this under vulnerabilities, but I think it's appropriate to really for us to talk about here and what we've experienced and what to be thinking about when it comes to communication. We've been pretty consistent in making it a priority that communication is key. It's a key to who you're communicating to, those important stakeholders. That assessment of information and communicating it to the correct stakeholders is very important, but it's also communication within your teams and within your staff. It's important within your landlords, within your occupants and residents. But an emerging vulnerability that I just want to circle back on and I want us to talk about is disinformation, or that malinformation that we're seeing. It's an emerging trend across disasters at this point. Hawaii was another great example of that, where we saw a lot of graphic pictures that were inaccurate and not there, and also what was actually happening on the island. But we're seeing it across the country. So I'm going to turn it over to the panel for some feedback and examples of who you're communicating with, how you're communicating with it, and how you're being consistent and factual with that information to get around what's happening, as Felicia mentioned, in the media.
So I want to start off, I think you already touched on earlier, was on the different, like, you can get a lot of requests for the same information. So as you get the information, build that distro list, and that's an external, hey, real quickly, hey, who's the POCs, throw them all in a distro or a box and send it, so that as you get updates, what I call feeding the beast. the beast of information. They're hunting for information. So feed them when you have those touch points. You know what I mean? So maybe they don't reach out to you. Oh yeah, they sent me an email 3 hours ago. I'll use these numbers versus calling them right now. It takes time off your plate. So that's kind of when I'm in our operations center and I'm talking to my staff there, and I'm like, hey, when you get a piece of information, let everybody know, and then think who else needs to know. You know what I mean? So that's kind of a big thing too. So I've sent it to my district list, but who else might need to know this information? And then if you do have, I doubt, how many of you have a public information officer, or at least somebody identified in that role in your office? So okay, we got quite a few. So those that have those, have that person kind of take the lead on that, but also make sure that they're feeding the people, they're doing that reach out and kind of helping you with that dissemination. Disinformation is a big thing. Bigger events, you're going to probably have a JIC or a GIS set up, for those who know those terms, like Joint Information System or Joint Information Center for your major events. So as you get information, feed them. As you hear about disinformation, feed them as well, because that's kind of on those type of larger entities that have a little more bandwidth to really get after calling the media, like, no, that is incorrect, putting out like corrective statements to the media and things of that nature to fix, because I see a report, 4 people died. I'm calling the local EM or the local, hey, who happened? Though that you might already know that. When you see that same report come out, feed it up early if you can, or ping it as disinformation, so it can help the process. Maybe take it off your workload and put it on somebody else's a little bit. I'm not saying to push your workload to somebody else, but there are the right people for those some of disinformation work. So.
Thank you for that. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, one, and that is, there is going to be an emergency operations center, right? If you all reach out, as we suggested earlier, to your local emergency manager, you'll have that relationship. If you can spare someone to be there in the EOP, say this person is assigned, this is our person who we're going to feed information to, who will be around the table to provide updates as she gets them, and who you should rely on in the room for information. So it then takes the burden off someone calling you, trying to get the updated information, and that person having the responsibility to be the one who makes that distribution out to the list, so people become familiar with, it's going to be Brittany Kelly who is representing Bremerton Housing Authority and the Emergency Operations Center, and she's going to give updates. She gets updated information at 7 p.m. every night, right?
Yes.
So our experience is there's not a lot of good information that comes out of a disaster. It's hard to find good information,
Yeah.
and we have all kinds of entities looking for information. So whether it was communicating with HUD in the interest of its programs, communicating with our residents about what might be up or happening for them, the local politicians, the press, local civilian groups, Cal OES, that's the California Office of Emergency Services, that's the governor's office that handles these things, USDARD, the state Department of Housing and Community Development. There's a lot of stakeholders we needed to keep informed. There was no mechanism to do that. But one thing we had that no one else had, we have housing data, and we have good housing data. And in fact, because we're very involved in the development work of our community, we're able to track all of the development activity in our jurisdiction, whether it was nonprofit or for-profit driven. So we decided we would become the data source. And so HUD came to us, Cal OES would come to us. All the information that was being fed out there was being sourced by the Housing Authority. The press was particularly hungry for information. And what was really interesting, all these public jurisdictions have public PIO officers, public information officers. But do any of them speak freely to the press? Are you kidding me? They're all like handcuffed and hobbled. They don't say that. But as a housing authority, there's no one looking over our shoulders. We can speak the truth. And so we educated the community, and it was a really important role. It was really important for us in our IT department to be able to take our data and be able to do data mining, because you never knew which angle, what direction the questions were going to come from. So it was really important for us to be able to access our data and be able to manipulate it. Again, I talked about the PIOs. They're not very helpful in general. Ours is. And then we tracked all our development work, which really was housing response. So we were tracking the things that the community was most interested in, which is the creation of this new opportunity. So a really important role in a disaster that a housing authority can take.
And then moving into the final part that we're going to talk about today is internal communication. So what does that look like with staff, residents, HCV landlords? I'll probably start with Ed, to be honest. How did that work when it comes to working both with staff and residents and landlords?
Okay, well, first I'll start with staff. As I said, we lost a number of staff, so a great deal of focus early after the disaster was in just ensuring our continuity and functionality. We were successful in doing that, but we put a lot of effort into it, and it was very hard recruiting people in an environment where there is no housing and no one can move. And so our residents were largely untouched. Section 8 residents were affected a bit because we had to adjust our program to integrate the project-based voucher component relative to the setting of reasonable payment standards, et cetera. A lot of our work post-disaster was with landlords. We had to beg landlords to take on Section 8 clients. We created a landlord incentive program. We educated the landlords at great length about their importance in terms of serving this actually huge component of their community. So it actually brought us closer to the landlord community, and we had, interestingly enough, altruism does exist in this land. There are those who stepped forward and made the sacrifice, and were quite willing to work with us and our clients. So delightful. But yeah, the internal communications is kind of like playing a closely held hand of cards in a poker game, high stakes poker game. You got your hand there, and you're not sure what anyone else is going to play, and you have to play carefully, and you play methodically and systematically, and you work your way one hand at a time through the game.
So what did that look like with residents and landlords? Was it lots of phone calls? Did you have like sessions? Did you do just lots of like paper email or paper snail mail? Like what did this look like when it came to having these conversations when you're giving them regular updates and also asking them to play nice?
Well, we're a rural housing authority, so we're scattered to the winds, great diseconomies of scale. So we communicate mostly through, well, up until then, through paper communications, letters, written communications. They cost a lot. Now we have a portal. We're able to communicate with our residents through a portal. But we do not generally communicate with them in person because it's too hard to gather enough of them in one place at one time. So it's a little bit of a challenge, but you know, in today's day and age, going wireless has really changed the business in the last 25 years. It's made things possible that we would never have imagined was possible, and it's created redundancies and assurances in our system of communication that really makes things a lot more. I mean, imagine, I can remember the day of sending letters and expecting a response 3 weeks later. Now we send an email or we send a text and we expect a response within 30 seconds. The amount of business we can do now is just extraordinary.
Yes.
I have two questions for you. Number one is about project-based vouchers. As we know, this is a very, very useful way to find landlords to work with and house our families, but it's a lengthy process. Very, very lengthy and can be cumbersome with all the rules and regulations. Did you go through the public announcement looking for landlord, and how did that work in an environment where there were no housing, and how do you expand that housing opportunity? That's my one question.
So the first question, just so that everyone else can hear, is that project-based vouchers, it's lengthy, it's cumbersome. How do you get landlords to play along?
Okay, so I'll give you the short version. Tomorrow you get the long version. But what happened is we're looking for new development opportunity. There's no sense in bringing on existing landlords. All of their properties are full. So we're looking to build new properties. One of the things that we did do in advance of the disaster, and we had no idea that it was going to work this way, we've been very, how should I say, proactive on getting to know our local development community. We partner with our local developers. We encourage nonprofit and for-profit developers to come into our community. We know that community. So when the disaster happened and all of a sudden we had 2 special sources of funds available, I had 12 developers who jumped in and partnered up with us to start delivering housing. It was to that community that we issued RFPs. We did 6 RFPs over the course of 4 years, targeting different kinds of projects in different communities. But basically we set up, I believe it was 19 projects supported by project-based vouchers as part of our disaster response. But it did involve the regular old solicitation process. We would get a successful developer. We would make a commitment of vouchers to that developer. More often than not, we would actually partner with that developer on the backside. and then we would go ahead and develop the property. And so in creating the property, a new property, leveraging these two sources of funds, one of which is CDBG-DR, by doing that, we created housing opportunity in the community, not just for the voucher holders. We might have 25 vouchers in a 70-unit project, but we created another 50 units of housing just for the market. And so just this idea of creating housing opportunity across the board was just paramount to our recovery. And so the project-based, by having a Section 8 voucher program, gave us the tool to leverage ourselves into that development activity. We couldn't have done it without those.
You mentioned a special allocation of tax credits. Did you use those as well?
So there were two special sources of funding that came to us after the disaster. The first came by way of a congressman from Sonoma County. There were 18 counties in California in 2018 that had seen wildfire disasters. Congressman from Sonoma passed a special allocation of 9% tax credits as part of the congressional allocations that year. That was made specially available to those 18 counties. Ironically, because we had these development relationships set up with these developers, Butte County was able to walk off with about 60% of that allocation. So we were able to capitalize on our development relationships.
Second question.
Yes, my second question is about your staff and being the director and having all this work that you have to do. What were the steps your agency took to show up for your staff, to nurture them? Obviously, they are also going through PTSD. They also have their own struggles. And what did that look like, that nurturing side?
So how did you nurture your staff through this response?
Thanks for
Sorry.
asking that. As you know, most of us who work at housing authorities are just out of control caretakers. And you enter into a disaster mode, and all of a sudden you go on hyperdrive, and it's not sustainable. So our first concern really was for our staff, not just reconstituting staff, but supporting them. Many of them had been traumatized, had family members traumatized, many of them had to relocate. Rather dark time. But we spent a lot of time doing special lunches. We would have use the local community college and another consultant to come in and do wellness trainings, meditation trainings, stress relief trainings. We allowed ourselves a lot of liberties we wouldn't normally, because things were loose and you had to be loose. You had to keep the energy flowing, and the energy, you didn't want to, staff was important. So we were careful not to get too persnickety about attendance, to the minute, and kind of, you have to pick your battles. And in this kind of battle, you pick the bigger battles. And so you cut staff slack wherever you can. And again, going back to this mission, if you're focused on the mission and you have people who bought into the mission, it takes very little to motivate them other than to give them a supportive work environment. Through COVID, it taught us how to work out of the office remotely, so everyone can work remotely. That's a nice feature. We're a lot more lenient. We now offer 2 schedules to our staff. We offer 980 staff a work week. We offer a 410 work week, so there's flexibility in our work hours. We never had that before the disaster. We're working with a whole different work world now in the last 5 years relative to staff expectations, and this folded into our disaster recovery.
Go.
That's exactly my question, because as the risk manager, one of the things that concerns me a little bit is that on any given day, some staff will be in our office or at property sites around the Puget Sound region. Others will be at home. I don't know if there's any centralized list of who's where. What if IT is seriously disrupted? What if other communications are seriously disrupted? How will we coordinate with regard to doing all these things we all talked about?
Well, it's a good question. I think our direction has been to say that the camaraderie we find in the office is really important, and we really encourage it. But if we have situations where staff need to work out of staff independently, and we got a health condition or a significant other, we try to be very, very flexible. But in an agency our size, the teamwork really is what pulls everybody together into the mission. So we lean towards office-centric, with the plasticity of being able to work outside. It's almost it's a balancing act, and we're sort of discovering our way through it as we move forward. It's not a finished pie. I'm not sure how like you say, there's a lot of cross currents that run through running staff out of the office.
Ron,
So one practice, one practice that we've seen housing authorities use, I mentioned it earlier, is to have the good old call list, right? And if something were to happen, people know that you're assigned to these 5 people, reaching out, keeping in contact. You're assigned to these 10 people, however you break your list up. And so having something like that gets executed and everybody who knows, who's a part of it, knows that they have their responsibilities and execution is a good thing.
Ron, anything to add from an IT perspective?
Yeah, pretty much, very much similar to that, where we would segregate our teams into sub-teams. So here's a supervisor over a team of 5 or something, and then they had a manager that was over several teams, and really leverage the, like, if something goes, I'm going to get a hold of you, you need to get a hold of everybody else, kind of call chain, just for that reason. Most of the time, the mobile numbers were functioning fairly well. But if I were the supervisor over my team of 5, I was relentless till I got a hold of all 5. So in terms of that connectivity of what we're doing and what we have available, that's kind of level 1. Beyond that, now you're back into systems and remotes and things like that, and hopefully, again, the policy decisions of mobile hotspots, MiFis, how granular, how many different levels of risk do we need to go down to? So you're going to have probably a couple of those that get your team, but the call list and then making groups of people responsible for groups of people helps you keep in touch with everybody.
So there are times when, while I was in Washington, D.C., where the phone systems were just overburdened, right? And you could not get a call out. 9/11, there was an earthquake in D.C. Those times, the only thing you could do was text, right? So recognizing that you may have to switch, for whatever reason, data got through, but calls couldn't during that time frame. And so it was one of the ways I know that we were checking on people was through text messages at that time. But again, knowing who has the responsibility for contacting which group of people and feeding information back in is important.
I think I've also seen where they have like Facebook groups or even Google groups where they already go ahead and set that up, so that way whenever someone can grab to online, they can at least sign in there as well, especially if cell towers are down, but you can use Ethernet later on, is an option. That way you can at least be posting the updates, and that way when your staff or your residents can get to something, there's a place that they know they can go for the most recent updates.
And there are services that you can use that like sat phones, but a number you can dial that gets you priority in the calling list.
The Gets Access card.
There we go. Gets,
So-
yeah.
So they've actually gone, I have the card, but they're going to an app now. So,
Okay.
and that's something, the Get system that's the priority network. So during a disaster, so we know that this allows you to get access regardless of the bandwidth that you'll have priority for access. So maybe not everybody in your agency needs it, but you should have at least one person in each of your office that has an access so that you can call out, you can get those calls from some of your residents as necessary, or communicate that way. We used to have a card. I actually have one. I just got to hire somebody like, oh, they won't give me a card anymore. I have to download an app. I'm like, more technology.
It's great till it fails.
And then I do want to highlight, we talk about like staff care. I mean, my background is in nursing, so I really care about people as well. Within the state of Washington, for those my Washington residents, EAP, Employee Assistance Program, there's a lot of resources on there. I actually called them for some staff support yesterday for some individuals. So great resources, and they have crisis teams, and there's other state agencies have similar teams. DOH has some similar assets available if you guys are overwhelmed and need some staff counseling, some staff assistance to talk through some of the PTSD of the events. There are resources out there, and a lot of that can be activated. Just call your EOC and say, hey, I need some crisis counseling support or some stress relief support for my team, and get that's where my office and your local EMs could come in to kind of leverage that resource. So you don't have to do the work to get it. Let us know you need it, and let the system get it for you. And we'll show you
Awesome. Well, this is,
we check in to see if.
That's where I was
go
going.
ahead, go
I
ahead,
was like,
go
all
ahead.
right, so this concludes what we're doing for today. Great job on being engaged, made it go a little bit faster, which means we get to end a little bit sooner, and I know that matters for some of you all that need to travel today. However, I'd love to just do a debrief of just from 4 to 5 different people on what have you learned? What are your takeaways? What does this look like? We would like feedback. What are the sustains? What are you like, I didn't know that, or I didn't think about that, or I'm going back to my team and having X conversation. So any volunteers? I can sit down.
I'll just go so I can catch one less person. Confirming what exactly HUD's role is versus our role versus the state and county. We could all publish plans, but having a
Right.
conversation where we come back to the agency, say we had conversations, we met with them, this is the output of what they kind of expected.
Awesome, thank you for that. Yes.
Yeah, we have like a number of emergency plans that we have ready, but we completely overlooked the Section 8. Like that's just not factored into
Oh.
the business continuity plan at all. So that's a pretty big blind spot.
Wow. Yes.
Trying to create a plan that encompasses the site staff, and then you have your office staff, and then you have your people out in the field, that may be working from home. What that looks like, what steps do you have to take in each of those sections?
Thank you. Yes.
I don't know who my emergency manager is, but I'm going to find out if I'm on the property.
Thank you. Yes.
Mr. Rogers. There's only one guy's department, which is it's mentionable, it's manageable. And so I think that plans like this really help us mention it so that it can become manageable. But I got to know what questions to ask.
Right.
But this is a concern.
Where are you located?
Spokane.
Spokane. That is Chandra Fox is her name. I can give you her email right now.
Man.
I talk to her nearly daily.
Anyone else want to volunteer? Greg.
You got notes.
For us, it's more of just looking at it like from a gap analysis perspective, like where are we missing the holes?
Right.
We've got a pretty robust tech system to all of our landlords, to all of our residents, to all of our employees. So I would consider, not to brag, but I think we're a pretty mature shop when it comes to that. But where are the gaps, where are the holes in our emergency plans, going up to external entities? The other thing is understanding the magnitude of our responsibility, right? Because we're not the authority having jurisdiction, but we need to be able to know who that person is.
Correct.
And it's Mike, and I forget his last name.
Yes.
What I took away from it, and thank all of you, it was very informative. I'm new to public everything. But I thought of, okay, a disaster is not just Katrina or we had a tornado or whatever. I'm thinking of we live in gangland. Like we had drive-by shootings the other day. And what if we have a lockdown? What if, just like the smaller disasters that would happen, how can I take that same mindset and these tools and apply it on a micro level?
No, that makes sense.
Very helpful. Thank you.
That is useful for sure. Just take a small bite out of it.
Take a small bite, and again, plans are evolving. So start small, then you look at it in a different lens, a different problem set. Okay, then what are the different, and then that becomes almost over time. Your base plan is built, and you have annexes for civil disturbance or police action. Maybe these are the considerations we make, or these are the steps we take in that situation. And really, those are just subsections of the plan you build out. It doesn't have to be tomorrow. You can take some time doing this and work through the problems.
Yes.
I think for us, what I'm really aware of is that the pandemic was a very important reason not to pay attention to all of the stuff that happens out in the natural world. And it's time to rethink, refresh, update, make all of those things actionable and clear, I think.
That makes sense. Well, thank you all for the first day. Thank you for the engagement and the conversation. I'm really looking forward to tomorrow. Tomorrow's very heavy recovery focused, but we are going to have two additional panelists to be able to really support some of the questions and discussions we've had today, especially when it comes to FEMA and housing. Thank you.